So I'm starting to feel sorry for the millennials because I think they've been completely sold up the river in more ways than one. Now, of course, it's hard to feel sympathetic for a lot of millennials because they were insufferable woke scolds and they polluted all of the social environments into which they entered. They came in, made a series of demands, made everything really unpleasant, and then essentially kicked out a load of people who were already there, people of actually sort of my age, sort of like, the younger Gen Xers, and then proceeded to stomp around like they were the most relevant generation that has ever existed. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. The piper is being paid. I mean, I do think that a large part of Donald Trump's win was, frankly, woke scold millennials running around screeching that everyone was racist, everyone was sexist, everyone was homophobic, and you have to point it all out. This was a genuine nightmare, frankly, at some times. And then, like, piggybacking that onto Black Lives Matter as well, it's just like, oh my God, that is absolutely insufferable. But in more material ways, the millennials have also been completely sold up the river. It is the system itself, and whereas my generation were always deeply suspicious of systems and corporations, millennials seem to have embraced them with gusto and decided that they were going to change them from within. Although I realise that, millennials broadly are characterised by being anti-capitalist, they're also incredibly pro-corporatist in the way that they actually behave. They will give lip service saying, oh, I don't like capitalism, I don't like giant corporations, and yet they'll go and work for them and live these sort of little end-of-history lives where they work in a very boring office environment, very concerned with the maintenance of HR and the rule of HR over the company, and not really do any proper work. And so they fed into the system rather than bleeding it of manpower. They decided to join it and endorse it and change it and make it woke from within. But that hasn't actually helped, has it? Because about half of millennials just don't have a house. And that's bad, because millennials are not young anymore. Millennials are actually kind of getting old. This is a great article from Newsweek, and we'll just go through some of it, because it's just like, oh my God. Like, this is really bad, right? So millennials are the most likely to have given up on purchasing a home in the past 5 years, according to a new survey. The affordability survey found that 1 in 6 aspiring buyers in the US could not find a property they could afford between 2020 and 2025 and have given up on making a purchase. Now, does that mean that they're like, okay, maybe the number of people being legally let into the United States is an issue? No, because the US is about 1 million people a year immigrate to it legally. Is that an issue? No, that's not an issue. You're a racist. But for some reason, I can't get a house. Now, it's probable that there are mega corporations in America like BlackRock and Vanguard and whatnot that are buying up a lot of the homes. So that is probably not helping. But I think another issue that the millennial has is that despite being the first digital natives, the internet savvy generation, the first generation who had the internet for as long as they can remember, they actually don't seem to take that much advantage of it because they love to live in big cities. For some reason, millennials think that living outside of big cities, living in the country, living in small towns where they grew up, these are not cool things to do. These are essentially backwards in some ways. And so even though you could work remotely from the internet, via the internet, they tend to love to move to big cities because this is where their culture is. They're very much city-dwelling people. And that's all well and good, but if millions of you are moving to giant cities, which are not cheap places to live anyway, then I'm not surprised you're looking around going, well, I can't afford a house here. No, you probably can't. There are lots of areas in America that are actually very affordable. I mean, one of the things I'm very jealous of is the size of houses in America compared to the prices. But then I'm not looking in like central New York or central LA or wherever, like all of these like major metropolitan areas. I'd be looking at somewhere out in the country a bit because I like the countryside for a start. I can't stand the idea of living in a big city. But then I have a family. A lot of millennials don't, and we'll get to that in a minute, in fact. And so they're looking around and going, okay, this is terrible. It's like, yeah, but you have options. You just choose not to pursue them because you've got a particular vision of a lifestyle in mind that becomes more difficult to attain if you all go for it. Anyway, the share of discouraged homeowners went up 22% to 22% among millennials, the highest percentage among all generations. The Gen Xers at 17, Gen Zers at 12, the baby boomers also at 12. What I love about the Gen Zs, like the Zoomers, are just like, yeah, I'm bright, bushy-tailed, bright-eyed, and optimistic. It's like, well, and the baby boomers already bloody own their bloody houses. Maybe the Gen Zers are like, yeah, well, my baby boomer parents or grandparents are going to die eventually, and we'll inherit it. So it turns out that the median age of first home buyers in America hit 38 last year, which is really old. Like, it should be, if our civilization was being run properly for the benefit of the people in it, it should be that someone who has, in their mid-20s, finished their education, has landed themselves a half-decent career, and like by sort of 26, 27, has saved, I don't know, 20 grand or something, right? They should be able to buy their house with a nice deposit, and maybe they send 10 grand, the parents give them 10 grand, I don't know, like rough estimate scenario. Saved enough for a deposit. They should, in their mid to late 20s, be able to buy a house. They've got a career. They should have a girlfriend. They should be starting a family. This should be carrying on. But no, more than a decade later, they're still only just buying their homes. And that's up from 35 in 2023. So that's quickly that this is going up. And that's almost by 10 years compared to the 1980s, which is what essentially I was suggesting. A civilization that is being run well would allow people in their late 20s to hit the property ladder running with a good career and a family life ahead of them. But that means many millennials are pushing 40 as they finally step on the property ladder. However, many still do not own a home. 54.9% of millennials own their own home in 2024, a rate that was essentially a change from the year earlier. So 45% just don't own a home. And so this is not good, right? So why are they giving up? Well, apparently they're in massive amounts of debt. And this is another lie that was sold to them. Because I bet there are loads and loads of millennials out there who have degrees in things they're not actually using their degrees for. And when degrees become incredibly common, they essentially become the barrier to entry for things that don't even need degrees. Like in Britain, for example, you have to have a degree to become a police officer. Why? Why would you need that? Obviously, you have training to become the thing, and yet still, we require you to have a degree. And so it becomes this weird barrier to entry that forces people onto this road. Well, you want to do a job, well, you've got to get a degree. So the average millennial has an outstanding student loan balance of 40 grand. And of course, there's interest being paid on that. And so essentially, these things are very difficult to end up paying off. And this is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. And yet, this is the dream they were sold. This is the world that they were sold. And as far as I can see, I've never seen millennials talking about, especially because they're all millennial leftists and they're busy talking about insufferable social problems like racism and sexism and blah, 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 right? But you don't see millennials talking critically about what has been done to them. Because look at this. This is terrible. Younger Americans are feeling this disadvantage at a time when home ownership is increasingly out of reach. Gen Z and millennials are in their prime home shopping years but face a high barrier to entry. Yeah, no kidding. And of course, home prices are going up because of a surge of demand during the pandemic and a chronic lack of supply all across the country. Well, again, it depends where you look. But there are other social factors in America as to where people actually want to buy homes and things like that. We don't need to go into that here. But anyway, 74% of millennials still believe that owning a home is part of the American dream. So this is something they want. This is something they're not going to get, or at least half of them aren't going to get. And 20% of them are just given up entirely. And the average millennial has got 40 grand in debt, which is rough, man. Really, really rough. And this is just becoming an obvious problem. I mean, this is a problem here, of course, as well, where it's becoming evident that, look, like London, if you're a young person and you're born in London, you're never buying a house in London. You are never buying a house in London. London has 40% of the immigrants in this country. 40% of all of the people born overseas who move to this country live in London. How they can afford to do that is a great question that I'm not going to explore here. But the point is, it's the same here as it is in America. If you go to, say, the northeast, the average home price is something like 100 grand. Okay, that's a lot of money, but like that's not that much money. It's just a lot of people don't want to live in these areas because these are unfashionable. They are considered backwaters. Even if you can work from the internet, which a lot of people do now, you can be some sort of business owner or entrepreneur via the internet. If you're an artist or something like that, you sell your services, people still want to live in the prestigious areas. And it's like, okay, well, then you're going to find yourself with a problem. And again, the average millennial leftist is probably like, yes, I would love more immigration. Of course, I love immigration. I don't know how they can afford houses and I can't. Well, I mean, they just rent and get the rent paid for by the government. But the point is, that's happening here, and this is happening as just I'm sure it's in other places. And I've already come to terms with the fact that I'll probably have to be the one who underwrites my own kids' mortgages, right? Like, I've been very lucky being successful on YouTube. Most people aren't successful on YouTube, right? And God willing, I will continue to be successful. But like, I've already come to terms with the fact that my kids probably won't be able to afford their own houses either. I mean, at the very least, I'll probably have to pay for their deposit or something. And so, I'm making plans for that, right? I'm planning in my future, okay, it's entirely possible my kids will be at home into their sort of late 20s, early 30s, just because of what the housing market actually looks like. And do we think it's going to get better anytime soon? Probably not. Another issue is in Ireland, as Gearoid Murphy is talking about here, is likely 70+% of Irish 25 to 29-year-olds in Ireland still live with their parents, and inflation is exceeding wage growth, and so they're not going to escape this trap. In 1991, the year I was born, 2/3 of people were homeowners by 28. It's doubtless the same over here as well. And this, as he says, a significant majority of married couples with children under 10 were single-income households, likely around 2/3. In 1991, in Britain, the average price of a house was 4 times annual wage. Pretty reasonable. The average price of a house now is 12 times the annual wage, and it's just demand for us. It's sheer demand in Britain. This has made just living in our countries an increasingly remote prospect. And this is why you get people like Gary's Economics being like, right, okay, we've got to do something about the millionaires and billionaires, we've got to do tax the rich. And the thing is, I don't even disagree that we have to do something. We do have to do something about this. But the first thing we have to do is cut the increasing amount of demand. Where is the insane amount of demand for housing in our countries coming from? And that is, of course, mass immigration. But Gary, being a leftist, and the rest of them, the sort of socialist left, being leftists can never accept that actually there are 2 aspects to this. Let's assume that everything they're saying about billionaires buying up housing is true. Now, in Britain, that's not the case, but let's just, I could look it up, but I'm not going to for the sake of this argument. Let's just assume, for the case of America, like BlackRock, Vanguard, whoever, are buying up all of the housing and then renting it to immigrants, right? Yeah, that's a real problem. But the supply of immigrants is allowing them to do that. As Peter Kropotkin said, the wealth of the Rothschilds, I think it was, or the Vanderbilts, comes from the poverty of the poor. And in this particular case, the wealth of the asset-owning international corporations and hedge fund managers and whatnot comes out of the availability of immigrants. If they didn't have so many immigrants around, they just wouldn't be able to do this. And so one way of starving the rich out is to simply stop immigration into our countries. And that would allow our own people to be able to actually set lives up. This would actually help the working man, but it would actually help the average millennial as well. So this is a real problem. And this is a problem everywhere. It's a problem in Ireland, it's a problem in Britain, it's a problem in America. And of course, there's a consequence of this. And what it is it crushes the birth rate. So it becomes a self-perpetuating doom loop. If you can't buy a house, you're not going to start a family because you don't want to start a family in basically impoverished conditions. And so, we don't have enough people to start families. We've got to bring some more people in, which increases the prices, which makes getting a job more difficult, which increases scarcity in our countries. And therefore, fewer people then have children. And go on and on and on, until basically it is just not feasible to have children unless you are wildly successful, which most people aren't. And the system will continue to say, well, look, we need to import people, though, because otherwise the system collapses. And we are just destroying our own country through this process. So the Gary's economics kinds of socialists can ignore this if they want, but it will still be an inevitable aspect of the problem that they are seeing and complaining about. This is not going to go away. The more we keep importing people, the more difficult things become, and the more this keeps destroying our own civilization from within. I mean, look, this is just so straightforward. Right? The meltdown of the financial system may not have inspired romance, but it did push the Bank of England to slash interest rates, knocking £4,000 off a typical household's annual mortgage bill. In the 3 years from 2008, economists calculated that these household savings boosted the birth rate by 7.5%, equivalent to around 50,000 extra babies. People responded to this cash flow boost by having more children. Their findings are part of a growing international body of research which suggests housing lies at the heart of a global problem with plunging fertility rates. It is an issue that may matter more in Britain than anywhere else, and you can imagine that housing in, say, the third world being exceptionally cheap isn't a barrier to them starting their families. I mean, it just doesn't occur to them, I imagine. But housing being incredibly expensive in the West actually does act as a barrier to us starting families. And so if we want to fix the problems with our countries entirely, this is one area that we really need to put some thought into it.